The sharp winter air nipped at Michael's face as he stepped out of his bakery, Dulce Esperanza, in the quiet town of Alford, Vermont. Snow crunched under his boots. And the world was still, wrapped in a blanket of early morning silence. His bakery wasn't open yet, but the aroma of fresh bread and coffee lingered in the air. A prelude to the warmth he offered to his customers daily. For Michael, these mornings were sacred, a time to prepare for the day ahead. As he shoveled snow from the storefront, his eyes caught a cardboard box by the entrance. Frayed and weathered. It didn't belong. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting deliveries. Unease settled over him as he crouched to open the box. Inside, huddled together, were 4 children. They were pale, frightened, and trembling against the cold. The youngest, a baby wrapped in a thin blanket, lay motionless. 2 toddlers clung to the oldest child. A girl about 5, whose wide eyes stared up at Michael with a mixture of terror and exhaustion. What are you doing here?" Michael's voice trembled. His words, barely audible, felt futile. The girl flinched at his voice but didn't speak. Michael extended his hand slowly. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." The girl hesitated but eventually let him lift her and the others out of the box. Their frail bodies were icy to the touch. And their clothes were threadbare. Michael carried them inside, wrapping them in blankets and offering warm milk and pastries. The bakery, once a haven of comfort, felt heavy with silence as the children ate cautiously. Michael sat nearby, observing them. His mind racing. Who had abandoned them? Why were they here? His eyes fell on a small patch sewn into the girl's coat, a triangle enclosing an unfamiliar letter. As he reached out to touch it, she screamed, knocking over her milk. Her voice was raw with fear. "Don't touch it, don't. They'll come." "Who will come?" Michael asked gently, his heart pounding. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face, and retreated into silence. Michael knew he needed help. He called Isabel, a detective and an old friend. "Isabel, you need to come to the bakery. Now." "Michael, what's going on?" Her voice was groggy but sharpened when he explained. "Children, symbols, I'm on my way." As he waited, Michael couldn't shake the girl's warning. Who were they? And what did the symbol mean? Outside, the town remained eerily quiet, the snow reflecting an idyllic calm that belied the dark mystery unraveling inside. Isabel arrived quickly, her badge glinting under the bakery's warm light. She knelt by the children, her face a mixture of compassion and determination. The oldest girl shrank away but stayed silent as Isabel examined the symbol. "It's not just decorative," Isabel murmured. "This looks like a marking, maybe linked to a group or organization. We need to figure out what it means." As the children were taken to the local hospital for evaluation, Isabel stayed behind with Michael, combing through every detail of the morning. Michael described the children's fear, the warning, and the symbol. "I'll run this through our database," Isabel said, "but something tells me this isn't local." Later that evening, Michael sat alone in the bakery, replaying the morning's events. His hands trembled as he cleaned the spilled milk. He felt haunted, not just by the children's plight but by the weight of the unknown. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. "It's worse than I thought," Isabel said. "The symbol belongs to a group flagged in some old case files, a cult operating across state lines. They're dangerous. Michael, if the kids are linked to them, they could still be in danger." Michael's stomach turned. The peaceful town he loved now felt like a facade, hiding something far more sinister. The next morning, Michael found another note on the bakery door. The message, scrawled hastily, read, "Stay out of it. They don't belong to you." Fear surged through him, but so did resolve. He called Isabel again, showing her the note. "This confirms they're watching," Isabel said grimly. "We need to protect those kids and find out who's behind this." As days passed, Michael became deeply involved in the investigation. Despite Isabel's warnings to be cautious, he wanted answers, for the children. For his own peace of mind. He began noticing unfamiliar faces around town, a man in a dark coat loitering near the bakery. A van parked too long by the hospital. One night, Michael's bakery windows were shattered. The same symbol from the girl's coat etched into the glass. The message was clear: back off. But instead of deterring him, it steeled his resolve. Through Isabel's investigation, they uncovered chilling details. The group was a fringe cult that believed in ritualistic cleansing of children to appease their leader. The children in Michael's bakery were likely escapees, left behind when the cult relocated. The turning point came when the oldest girl finally spoke. Sitting in the hospital's playroom, she whispered to Michael, her tiny voice trembling, "They said we weren't good enough. They were going to take us back. Please don't let them." Her words ignited a fire in Michael. He promised her, and himself, that he wouldn't let the cult take them. Working with Isabel and local authorities, Michael's bakery became an unlikely hub for uncovering the cult's operations. Community members, horrified by the story, came forward with tips about strange activity in the area, unmarked vans, abandoned buildings, and missing persons. A week later, a raid on an abandoned farmhouse uncovered more children and cult members. The leaders were arrested, and the children were placed into protective custody. Michael's 4 young charges were reunited with relatives after their identities were confirmed. As the town returned to normal, Michael felt forever changed. Dulce Esperanza remained a sanctuary, not just for pastries but for hope. He often thought of the girl's warning and her courage. The bakery walls now held a new purpose, a reminder of resilience and the power of community in the face of darkness. The investigation begins. Isabel's footsteps were hurried yet deliberate as she approached the bakery. Her breath forming clouds in the frosty morning air. The snow crunched under her boots. But she barely noticed. Her mind focused entirely on the urgency in Michael's voice during his call. She'd known him for years. He was steady, grounded, not one to panic easily. Whatever he had found this morning, it wasn't ordinary. The bakery came into view, its windows glowing warmly against the cold gray of the town. Isabel pushed the door open, and the comforting scent of fresh bread and coffee hit her. But the scene before her was anything but comforting. Michael stood near a table where 4 children sat wrapped in thick blankets. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. The oldest, a girl no older than 5, clung protectively to the others, her small body tense. "Thank God you're here," Michael said, his voice low but trembling. "I found them outside, in a box. They were freezing. I don't know who left them or why." Isabel crouched down to the children's level, her tone gentle. "Hi, I'm Isabel. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you," the youngest whimpered. And the girl pulled the baby closer, her gaze wary. Isabel's chest tightened at their fear. These kids had been through something terrible. She noticed the symbol on the girl's jacket, a triangle enclosing a strange letter. Isabel frowned, tracing it lightly with her finger. "Michael, did you see this?" she asked. "It's not just a design. This might be a mark of some kind, maybe a group or organization." Michael nodded. "The girl screamed when I touched it earlier," she said. "They'll come." His voice dropped. "Who's they? Isabel, what are we dealing with?" Isabel didn't answer immediately, her mind already working. "I'll need to run this through our system," she said finally, standing. "But this feels deliberate. Someone wanted them here. The question is, why?" Michael sighed heavily. "They're terrified. Isabel. Whoever did this, it's not just neglect. It's something darker." The girl's warning lingered in Isabel's mind as she helped Michael coax the children into a police car bound for the hospital. Once they were safely in the care of social services, Isabel returned to the station, digging through case files and databases. The symbol yielded a chilling result, a match to an obscure group flagged years ago, a cult involved in ritualistic practices. Their victims were often children, discarded when deemed unworthy. When Isabel relayed the news to Michael that evening, his face paled. "A cult? In Alford? Maybe not here specifically," Isabel said. "But these children were abandoned for a reason, and the group might not be far." That night, Michael found a note taped to the bakery door: "Stay out of it. They don't belong to you." Isabel's worst fears were confirmed. The group was watching, with the town on alert. Isabel led a team to investigate tips from locals about strange activity. Within days, they discovered an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Inside were more children and several cult members who were quickly arrested. The children Michael had found were eventually reunited with family. Their identities pieced together by authorities. But Isabel couldn't shake the image of their frightened faces, nor the terror in the oldest girl's voice when she spoke of them. As the town settled back into its routine, Isabel often stopped by Michael's bakery. They never spoke much about that morning, but both knew it had changed them. Isabel had seen many cases, but this one stayed with her, a haunting reminder of the darkness that could exist in the most unexpected places. And yet, in that darkness, there had been light, Michael's compassion, the community's vigilance, and the resilience of 4 small children who had endured the unimaginable. When Isabel stepped inside the bakery, the warmth wrapped around her, but it couldn't thaw the chill settling deep in her chest. Michael stood near the corner table, his anxious eyes flicking between her and the small group of children huddled together. The oldest, a girl of about 5, clutched a baby close to her chest, while the other 2 toddlers pressed tightly against her sides. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, darting to every sound as if expecting something, or someone. Isabel knelt down, her voice calm and soft. "Hi there. I'm Isabel. You're safe now. No one will hurt you." The children didn't respond, the girl tightening her hold on the baby. The silence was oppressive, filled with unspoken terror that lingered in the air. Michael cleared his throat, stepping closer. "I found them outside. In a box," he said, his voice low. "They were freezing. And look," he pointed at a strange triangle symbol sewn into the girl's jacket. "She screamed when I touched it." Said, "They'll come." "Isabel, what does that mean?" The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. Isabel's sharp detective instincts kicked in. But her heart ached for the children. She glanced at the symbol, a shiver running through her. "I don't know yet, but we're going to figure it out." In that moment, the tension in the bakery shifted, no longer just fear, but resolve. They didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain: the children needed protection, and Isabel wasn't about to let whatever darkness haunted them win. Isabel's sharp eyes scanned the children, taking in every detail, the way they huddled together, shrinking from Michael's every move, their haunted expressions far too mature for their young faces. Her heart tightened, but she kept her demeanor calm, crouching to their level. Her voice was soft, measured, meant to soothe. "Hey there," she said gently, her smile warm but restrained. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The words hung in the air, met with silence. The toddler closest to her clung tightly to the older girl, her tear-streaked face buried in a blanket. Isabel didn't press further, knowing trust would take time, if it came at all. Rising slowly, she turned to Michael. The warmth in her voice faded, replaced by a seriousness that seemed to chill the room. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her tone quiet but firm. Her gaze shifted briefly to the strange symbol on the girl's jacket. "I've seen something like this before." Michael's eyes widened. "You have? What does it mean?" Isabel exhaled sharply, crossing her arms as she glanced back at the children. "It's not good, Michael. I don't know all the details yet. But this symbol, it's connected to something dangerous. We need to act fast. These kids," she paused, her voice lowering. "They're running from something. Or someone." Her words hung heavy in the air, the warmth of the bakery doing little to dispel the growing sense of unease. Michael's pulse quickened as his gaze lingered on the patch. The triangle, with its mysterious letter stitched into the center, seemed to almost hum with a quiet menace. He struggled to place where he'd seen it before. But the more he stared, the deeper the pit in his stomach grew. "No," Michael said, his voice uneven. "I don't recognize it. But it feels like I should." Isabel's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she studied his reaction. She stepped closer, her tone quiet but unyielding. "This isn't just a random symbol, Michael. It's been linked to cases, disappearances, even trafficking. Not here in Alfred, but in larger cities nearby. Always the same pattern: this symbol appears, and then people vanish." Michael felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "You think these kids, they escaped something like that?" His voice trembled as he glanced at the children. The eldest girl caught his eye, her small frame rigid, her stare unblinking as though she knew they were talking about her. I don't think, Isabel said grimly. I know, and if they were left here, it means whoever was holding them either lost control, or they're still looking for them. Michael's heart sank. The air in the bakery felt heavier. The warmth of the ovens unable to dispel the chill creeping into his bones. What do we do? He asked. Desperation clear in his voice. Isabel straightened, her tone hardening. First, we keep them safe. No one in this town can know they're here until I dig deeper. Second, I'll call in a few trusted contacts. But quietly, if this group gets wind of where these kids are, they'll stop at nothing to get them back. Michael nodded, though fear clawed at his chest. The bakery, once his haven of peace, now felt like a fragile sanctuary on the edge of chaos. Michael's breath hitched as Isabel's words settled in the air like an oppressive weight. His knees felt weak, and he braced himself against the counter. His knuckles white. A trafficking ring, he whispered. His voice barely audible, but the horror behind it was unmistakable. Isabel nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the children. Yes, it's an organized network, ruthless and secretive. This symbol, she gestured toward the patch on the jacket, is their calling card. It's how they mark possessions. The word hit Michael like a slap. Possessions. The idea that anyone could refer to these children in such a way ignited a fury within him. But it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of nausea. He looked at the eldest girl. Her frail arms wrapped protectively around the younger ones. The strength in her gaze was heartbreaking. It was the look of someone far too familiar with suffering. How could they end up here? Michael asked, his voice cracking. This is Alfred, nothing like this happens here. Isabel sighed, running a hand through her hair. That's exactly why they were left here. It's quiet. Off the radar. Whoever left them knew they'd attract less attention in a place like this than in a big city. But that doesn't mean they're safe. If the people behind this find out they're here. She didn't finish her sentence. But Michael could see the fear behind her composed exterior. His stomach churned as he pieced it together. You think they'll come for them? I don't think they will. Isabel said firmly. These children are a liability. If they've escaped or been smuggled out, someone will want them back. Or worse. Michael's heart thundered in his chest. He couldn't fathom the kind of cruelty it took to treat children this way. His bakery, once a place of warmth and joy, now felt like a fragile shield against an approaching storm. What do we do? He asked. His voice resolute despite his fear. For now, Isabel said, her detective instincts kicking in, we keep them hidden and safe. I'll contact someone in the state's trafficking task force, discreetly. We can't risk anyone knowing where they are until we know more about who's behind this. Michael glanced back at the children, his resolve hardening. Whatever it takes, he said. I won't let anything happen to them. The eldest girl, as if sensing his determination, met his gaze. For the first time, there was a flicker of trust in her eyes, a fragile ember in the dark. It gave Michael a glimmer of hope. But it also deepened his sense of responsibility. These children had been through hell. And now their lives rested in his hands. As the morning sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the snow-covered town, Michael realized that his once ordinary life was now anything but. Michael stared at the children. Their tiny frames huddled together, trembling in the warm glow of his bakery. How had they ended up here? Abandoned on a freezing winter morning? His mind raced, searching for an answer. But each possibility only brought more questions. Who could do this? And why? Isabel's voice cut through his thoughts, steady but heavy with concern. Michael, this is serious. She stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the children. The symbol. The way they were left here, it all points to something bigger. These trafficking rings don't just operate in shadows, they infiltrate everyday life. It's possible these kids were discarded because they didn't fit the mold for whatever horrific plans these people had. Michael's stomach churned. The word discarded stuck in his mind like a splinter, painful and impossible to ignore. His bakery, a place of warmth and joy, now felt like it had been invaded by a darkness he couldn't comprehend. We need to act fast. Isabel continued, her tone sharp with urgency. First, we get these kids somewhere safe. Then, we figure out who's behind this and why they chose this town. These people, they don't make mistakes. Leaving these kids here was intentional. He nodded, though the weight of the situation made his movements feel mechanical. His chest tightened as Isabel's words sunk in. Child trafficking. The thought made him feel physically ill. He had always considered Alfred a quiet, safe haven, a place where people knew each other and looked out for one another. But now, the serene facade of his town felt like a cruel joke. Michael turned back to the children, his heart breaking all over again as he took in their fragile forms. The eldest girl met his gaze, her wide, haunted eyes speaking volumes. She didn't trust him yet, how could she? But there was a flicker of hope there, buried beneath the fear. As if she wanted to believe him. I'll do whatever it takes to help them, Michael said firmly, his voice cracking slightly. They're just kids, Isabel. They shouldn't have to go through this. Isabel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I know. And we will help them. But we have to be smart about it. These traffickers, if they realize these kids are here, they'll come back for them. We need to keep them hidden. At least until I can get in touch with the task force. Michael swallowed hard. Nodding again. Where do we take them? For now, they stay here. Isabel said. Your bakery is off the radar. And we can control who comes and goes. I'll make a few calls. But we need to keep this quiet. Michael hesitated, looking around the space he had built with his own hands. It was supposed to be a haven for the community. Not a sanctuary from something so dark and sinister. But as he looked back at the children, he knew there was no other choice. They'll be safe here, he said softly. More to himself than to Isabel. I'll make sure of it. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, the weight of responsibility settled on Michael's shoulders. His bakery was no longer just a place of warmth and comfort, it was now a refuge. A lifeline for 4 children who had been through unimaginable horrors. And as he stood there, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the distant sound of Isabel on the phone, he realized that his life, and his town, would never be the same again. Michael's gaze lingered on the children, their small faces etched with a mixture of fear and confusion that made his chest ache. They clung to each other, the oldest girl wrapping her arms protectively around the younger ones as though she were the only barrier between them and the world. It wasn't just sadness in their eyes, it was something darker, heavier. These children weren't just frightened, they were haunted. He turned away, pressing a hand to his face to steady himself. He couldn't afford to crumble. Not now. They needed him to be strong. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to focus on Isabel. Her calm yet determined presence grounding him. Isabel, he said, his voice rough with emotion. What do we do next? How do we help them? Isabel stood by the counter, her phone still in her hand. She'd been coordinating with someone on the other end, but now she focused entirely on him. First, we secure their safety, she replied firmly. I've contacted the task force specializing in trafficking cases. They're sending someone. But it'll take a few hours. Until then, we need to keep them hidden. If the people who abandoned them realize they're still here, they might try to take them back. Michael's stomach tightened at the thought. He glanced at the front windows of the bakery, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through. The thought of anyone coming for these children sent a surge of protectiveness through him. He nodded, his jaw set. No one will get to them. Not here. Isabel's expression softened, her usual hard edges giving way to something almost tender. I know you mean that, Michael. But we need to be careful. These people are dangerous. And they don't play by the rules. The children's safety comes first. But we also have to think about you. I'll be fine, Michael said quickly, brushing off her concern. I just want to make sure they're okay. She studied him for a moment. Then nodded. Good. Keep them calm. Don't push them to talk, they'll speak when they're ready. Right now. They just need to feel safe. Michael glanced back at the children. The youngest, a toddler with a head full of messy curls, had drifted off to sleep. Her small body tucked into one of the blankets he'd given them. The others were still wide-eyed, their gazes darting nervously between him and Isabel. "I'll get some food ready for them," Michael murmured. He headed toward the kitchen, his hands instinctively reaching for ingredients. Cooking had always been his way of finding clarity, of creating something good in the face of chaos. As he worked, the familiar sounds and smells of the bakery filled the space, lending a sense of normalcy to an otherwise surreal situation. Isabel remained by the counter, keeping a watchful eye on the children. Michael returned with a tray of warm pastries and cups of milk, setting them down gently on the table. The eldest girl hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. He offered her a soft smile, his voice low and soothing. "It's okay. You're safe here." She didn't respond, but after a long pause, she reached for a pastry, breaking it into smaller pieces to share with the others. Watching her care for the younger ones stirred something deep in Michael, a fierce determination to protect them at all costs. As the bakery's warmth enveloped them, Michael knew this was just the beginning. There were answers to be found and dangers to face. But for now, his priority was clear: keeping these children safe until help arrived. Isabel's voice was steady, but Michael could see the weight of the situation settling on her as well. The quiet urgency in her movements was a stark contrast to the calm that had initially descended over the bakery. She had a plan, but Michael could sense the undercurrent of uncertainty that came with dealing with something so dangerous, something so far out of their control. He wasn't used to feeling this powerless. "We need to keep them hidden," Isabel continued, her tone firm. "As much as I want to call the authorities, we can't risk anyone tipping off the people behind this. Whoever they are, they'll stop at nothing to get the kids back." Michael swallowed hard. The thought of these children being chased by whoever had done this to them sent a chill through his bones. They were just kids, too young to understand the nightmare that had already come for them. Isabel made her call, her voice low as she spoke to someone on the other end. She was talking quickly, gathering information, arranging the next steps. Michael tried to focus on the children, but his mind kept drifting back to the symbol, the fear in their eyes, the unknowns that were suddenly piled onto his life. The bakery had always been a safe haven, a place of warmth and comfort for the people of Alford. But now, it felt like a prison. He glanced at the children. The eldest, her eyes still wary, had picked at the pastries but hadn't taken a bite. The toddler had finally fallen asleep, her small chest rising and falling in soft rhythm. But the others remained alert. Too alert for their age. They watched him, their gazes heavy with unspoken questions, things he wasn't sure he could answer. Isabel finished her call, turning to him with a quiet but urgent expression. "Child Protective Services is on their way. They'll take care of the kids once we know they're safe. We'll keep them here until we have more information. In the meantime, I need to check with the local police. This symbol, it's not just something random. There have been cases before. Similar patterns. I need to find out if there have been any reports that match." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I can't believe this is happening. I thought I was just helping some lost kids." He paused, his thoughts clouded by the sheer weight of it all. What if they're in more danger than we think? What if whoever's behind this comes for them? Isabel met his gaze, her expression serious but reassuring. "That's why we're being careful. We need to move quickly. But we need to stay under the radar. The less anyone knows, the better. Her words were a reminder of the gravity of the situation. They were no longer just dealing with a stray group of kids. They were tangled up in something much darker. Something far more dangerous than they had initially understood. But despite the fear clawing at his chest, Michael knew there was no turning back. These children had been abandoned on his doorstep for a reason. And it was up to him and Isabel to ensure they didn't fall back into the hands of those who had left them there. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. His fingers hesitating for a moment before he sent a quick text to a few trusted friends in town, warning them to stay alert. They needed all the eyes they could get. If there was a chance that someone was watching, they needed to be prepared. Let's get them to safety, Michael said. More to himself than to Isabel. I don't know how much longer we have, but I won't let them get hurt again. Isabel nodded, her jaw set with the same determination. They had a long road ahead of them. But one thing was clear, they would do whatever it took to protect these children. The rest could wait. As Isabel made her call, Michael stood in the bakery, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never been a hero. Never imagined he'd be caught in the middle of something like this. But in that instant, he realized that the choices he made now would define the rest of his life. These children needed him. And he wouldn't let them down. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Outro. As the days passed, Michael's life was consumed by the mystery of the 4 children and the chilling discovery of the trafficking ring that had ensnared them. With Isabel's help, they unearthed deeper connections to a network far larger and more sinister than they had ever imagined. Despite the danger, Michael couldn't turn his back on the children. Their faces forever etched in his mind. What began as a simple act of kindness, bringing them into the warmth of his bakery, had transformed into a fight for their freedom and safety. Together, Michael, Isabel, and the children found strength in one another, pushing through fear and uncertainty. But the road ahead was still perilous. The shadow of the unknown loomed large. And Michael knew that the true battle had only just begun. As he stood before the bakery's door, looking out into the quiet streets of Vermont, he couldn't help but wonder how many other innocent lives were waiting to be saved. He made a silent vow to protect them, no matter the cost. The darkness would not win, not on his watch.